All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Happy Thursday. It's great to see you start joining. We're just going to give people a few minutes to settle in, and I am going to launch our very first poll for today. We only have two, don't worry. No quizzes or tests or anything, but our first poll, by now, especially if you've attended the previous three sessions, you know the drill, but we're always curious to know what brings you to today's webinar. Is it educational? Are you in the beginning stages of your third-party risk program? Are you a current prevalent customer? Just let me know there. I'm going to leave that poll up while I just go through a few introductions. We have a special guest here, founder and CEO of Cyber Marathon Solutions, Bob Wilkinson. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you, Melissa?
So good. And we also have Scott. I'm sure if this is your fourth time you've seen him before, Scott Lang, our very own VP Product Marketing here at Prevalent, as well as myself. My name is Melissa. I work in business development, and I'm usually the one who will follow up with you after this webinar. So I am sure I've chatted with some of you before. If not, you will hear from me or Amanda or Landon or Noel. So just be on the lookout for them. Don't put them in your spam folder or anything. Today we do have Bob, and he's going to dig into this topic entitled Reporting and Looking to the Future. So quick reminder, we want to value your time. So just feel free to use the Q&A for those burning questions. If you have them, put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And then this is also being recorded, as you can see. So you will get this in your inbox later today or tomorrow. Lastly, you're all muted, so just use the chat if you need to communicate something that is not a question for the Q&A. Other than that, I'm going to pause this poll and I'll let our expert, Bob, take over. Go ahead.
Thanks, Melissa. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining. Today's webinar is the fourth and concluding webinar on the topic of building a sustainable third-party risk management program. So today we're going to talk about KPIs, KRIs, management reporting, issue management, touch a little bit on financial services regulatory considerations, and then look to the future and the Resilience Operations Center, which I will expand on more and which I believe will tie things together nicely. So specifically, key performance indicators, key risk indicators, and their importance in backing up the story that you're telling management about your third-party risk management program. Program dashboards and reporting, and the need to differentiate your reporting for different levels of management. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I refer to as TPRM community, which is the importance of building relationships with your third parties and your extended supply chains to help realize mutual benefit. Issue management and its key role in remediation and preserving operational resilience. Risk exceptions, or what to do when the business just wants to accept the risk and not fix issues that are identified. The critical role that's played by lessons learned and the need to implement them. Then we'll talk a little bit about some key regulatory guidance and models that exist, which can be helpful for you. And again, wrap it up with the Resilience Operations Center. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Key performance indicators. There's often a lot of confusion that comes with the topic of KPIs and KRIs. The important thing, a key performance indicator is a measure of progress against one of your program goals. And the important thing that you should always ask yourself when it comes to key performance indicators is, why am I collecting it? So what? What does it tell me that is useful and is actionable and shows the direction of one of my program goals? This is really, at the end of the day, about trending. And when you collect key performance indicators, if they're not telling you something that you should be focused on and need to do, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, why am I collecting and reporting on this data? Now, a key risk indicator is a measure of the and a trending of key risks within your business. So from a third party perspective, is my program becoming more or less risky over time? And that's an important indicator, obviously, of whether your third party risk management program is managing to align with your business's risk appetite, or whether over time the use of third parties is generating more risk that might not be acceptable to your organization. So the other aspect that you need to focus on with KPIs and KRIs is, who are you going to share this information and at what frequency? Because you don't want to overwhelm people with data. You also want to have an automated method available to you to collect the data in the least difficult way with your business partners. So automation plays a key role in gathering this data, because you don't want to have to go out and query people every time that you need data if you can avoid it. Now, that leads into the next part, which is building program dashboards and doing your actual reporting. So as you generate this data, you want to think about, as I said, who you're reporting to and at what frequency, and that the story that you're telling is the story of the trends that are predominant in your program, and also what you need from people as you go forward. So topics that you could potentially report on that are meaningful are items like growth in the overall use of third parties, and by extension, in your extended supply chain. And the reason that that's important is because the growth of the number of third parties that you have in your TPRM program generally sometimes slips below the radar. But if you're growing your third parties, say at 10% a year, and you have 1,000 third parties, that means you have another 100 third parties this year that you need to do due diligence on and to continuously monitor and report on. So this is one of the important aspects, and we've touched on this in previous webinars, but I want to come back to it, is before you onboard a new third party, ask yourself if you already have a third party that provides that service. Because if you can identify a third party who's already providing the service to your organization, then what happens is you might be able to leverage that third party, not have to onboard another new one. And what is the result of doing that? The result is you've decreased risk because you have less third parties you're working with, sharing your information with, potential connections into your infrastructure. And if you use existing third parties, the other benefit that you get from that is that you'll probably get better pricing, more strategic relationships, and save money. So monitoring the growth in the overall use of third parties is an important message to communicate to management, because it reflects directly on your ability to be successful. If you have 10% more you have to do every year, the likelihood of getting a 10% budget increase is small. So you have to come up with effective ways to deal with that. You can monitor items like the increase or decrease in the overall risk in your third-party program. And using data analytics and various measurement techniques, you can measure the change in risk within your individual third parties, within specific domains within your program, like has my risk increased from the use of software developers, or has my risk increased from the number of call centers that I use? And you could also, using data analytics, measure the risk overall of your third-party portfolio, and is that trending up or down over time? You can look at items such as the completeness of your third-party inventory. Over time, you will discover additional third, fourth, and fifth parties. And understanding the completeness of your program is important to the success of your program. Have I accounted for all of my critical third parties? You can measure the increase or decrease in the number of issues, and I'm going to talk more about this later. That's absolutely critical. At the end of the day, the reason for one of the key reasons for having a third-party risk management program is to manage, measure, and decrease the overall amount of risk in your program. And you do that by addressing the issues that you identify in your third-party risk management program, and that you actually get closed and remediated. Remediation is the key. Then you can also report on issues that are raised by regulators. Now, if, for example, you work in the banking industry, the US government regulators have programs to evaluate key technology service providers to the financial services industry. And they produce examination reports based on what they find when they review these critical vendors. If they come back and they say, we have identified third-party X and we found the following issues, and they send that report to your company, then what you have to do is you have to inform your board of directors of the fact that the regulators notified you that they did a third-party risk assessment and they found the following issues. And you also have to present to your board of directors your corrective action plans for that. And that's specific to banking, but that's another concern. Moving on from there, one format that I found is useful for how you do your reporting. I break it down into 4 components. So reporting regularly on program implementation progress. What have you achieved to mitigate risk and improve the resilience of your program? What topics do you need to keep management informed of? What are the things that are important for them to know? Third, what roadblocks to success are you encountering for which you need management support in order to continue to improve the maturity and resilience of your program? And then fourth, recapping and stressing for management the path that you have to sustainability of your third-party risk management program. And again, to reinforce, what you're trying to show here are the key actionable trends. You just don't want to report data. You don't want to say, I have 500 third parties in my TPRM program. I have 500 third parties and the number of issues I have continues to go up, and I'm having issues getting my businesses and my vendors to address those issues that are identified. Now, to put it in context, KRIs, KPIs, program reporting, that constitutes the backup to the story that you're telling management about your TPRM program. We all start from somewhere. Sometimes TPRM programs are started because management sees the risk that arises here. Sometimes they're started and given impetus because of the particular hack that occurred, which negatively impacted their business. So everything has a story behind it. And what I've just talked about are the items that can help you provide data to back up your story. TPRM community. When we talk about community, what I'm speaking about is building relationships of trust with your third parties and with their third and fourth and fifth parties, helping your third parties to understand your company's vision for success. And you partner with your business partners to help convey this. But by explaining to your third parties what it is you're trying to achieve, you can get better feedback from your third parties on how you might be able to reach your goals. Maybe there are opportunities to collaborate above and beyond what you have done so far that will result in the opportunity of a win-win situation, both for your third party and yourself. Maybe you have the opportunity for what I refer to as gain share, and that both parties would equally benefit from that process. Another aspect is by learning to work with your third parties more effectively and building relationships of trust. Your company is a third party in all likelihood to your clients, and that by building these type of relationships, it makes you more aware, and it makes people in your organization more aware of the fact that you are third parties to your clients and that you can build on that relationship as well. But the important thing to remember is that trust is built one relationship at a time, and it can take days, months, years to build relationships of trust, and it only takes one event to have that trust disappear. So to the extent that you cultivate that relationship, and I know of a number of organizations who have periodic and annual meetings with their critical third parties to share their vision, to share the things that are coming from a third party perspective in the program, and that more rather than less communication is always a better way to go in building relationships. Issue management. For me, this is really the point where I will say the rubber meets the road. Issue management, first of all, having a process in place by which you can track the identified issues, whether they result from doing a periodic risk assessment, whether they come from continuous monitoring, whatever the case is, building what's sometimes referred to as a risk register, where you can track all of the identified issues that come up with, is a key foundational piece of how to manage risk and ensure operational resilience within your program. Now, having that, there are certain key things that are useful to have in any issue management program. And it's not just the capturing of the issue, it's the capturing of the responsible parties. It is the capturing of an associated date by which a corrective action plan will be implemented and then can be validated. And herein is where a lot of programs suffer problems, don't properly follow through, and have resulting breakdowns. So if you establish a framework and a risk register to capture all the issues that are identified, issues should never be put into the issue management system just as is. There should always be a responsible person, and there should always be a target date. Because if you don't have those, that gives people the wiggle room to fail to meet commitments and increases the risk that exists in your third-party risk management program. And especially for those third parties who are critical to your business. So issue, committed date, responsible person. That's the beginning. Then the next step is not waiting until you come up to the target remediation date and saying, is everything okay? It is just as with any issues that you manage within your organization. You need to go back to the responsible parties to get an indication of progress over time. Quite often, what you'll see when you look at issue management programs is that the target dates that end up in the system are either at the end of a quarter, at the end of mid-year, or all too commonly, the target date for issues is December 31st of whatever year you're in. Melissa?
Hi, I do have one question.
Sure.
Here it goes. So with regards to issue management, what is your perspective on best practice for which issues can be resolved through assumption of risk versus which need to be mitigated directly through resolution or action, whether internal or external of the organization, I think.
Okay, so now we're talking about remediation, acceptance, or transfer of risk. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in a bit about some of this, but the important issue, I'm going to defer this until I get to another slide, if
Okay.
I may, because it's like the next topic we're going to talk about is what do you do when somebody wants to just assume the risk? And what are the implications of assuming that risk? So what I would say is it falls into one of the three buckets. Either you remediate, you assume the risk, or you transfer the risk. But when you assume the risk, you have to do specific things. So let me move ahead here and talk about risk exceptions. So it is all too common that there's this misconception of who owns the risk. And the reality is the risk should be owned by the business owner who contracted with the third party for the service. The problem is it's often hard to hold them accountable because they figure once they've signed a third party up to provide a specific service to the company that they're done, and now it's the third party's problem, or it's the third party risk management people's problem, and it's not their problem anymore. But the reality is it's their problem because they're the ones who entered into that relationship with third parties. So what can we do to ensure that accountability and responsibility remain where they should be, which is with the business person who entered into the third party relationship? So one technique is to use what I refer to as risk exceptions. So the business says, I want to accept the risk. There's no real fix that's available right now to address this problem. The response could be, okay, what mitigating steps can you take right now so that the level of risk that the business is exposed to is lower than what it is just from you accepting the risk? And then ensuring that those risk mitigation steps get implemented and followed through on. That's part one. The second part is, oh, by the way, please formally assume the risk and sign off and put your name on it that you've accepted on behalf of the business this risk which you're asking us to take. And that's when things become very interesting, because what happens at that point is the business says, what do you mean put my name on it? And that's the part where you have an interesting conversation with the business, because now they're being held accountable for the assumption of risk. So documenting the risk, asking for the mitigating controls, and then finally going back and say, okay, what is a reasonable time frame by which we can review the issue that was identified to see if solutions have been developed that can now be implemented. So with the assumption of risk, hold the business owner accountable, look at the mitigating actions that can be taken, and periodically review to see if a solution is available to address it when they want to assume risk. Ideally, if there is an issue identified, there's a remediation that can be applied. Often, though, there are situations where that's not the case. So particularly in terms of software, if their software upgrades are needed, and operating systems have to be upgraded, new equipment has to be purchased, that's something that's going to take time. What steps can you put in place in the meantime to mitigate that? And then risk transfer, the use of cyber insurance to address some of the liability, for example, something that might happen in a ransomware attack, is the third piece that can be used to deal with risk. But when issues are identified, one of the three needs to happen, and risk exceptions for the assumption of risk is an important point that needs to be focused on. So I always come back to that. But just to reinforce, if issues are identified, that is the first, not the last step in third-party risk assessment. And that until issues are remediated, either through an assumption of risk, remediation, or the transfer of risk, there has been nothing done to decrease the risk that's associated with the issues that have been identified. So hopefully that answered the question that person had. But it is often an interesting and challenging discussion with your business partners when you ask them to sign up and commit for it. Another aspect of this topic is when the business says, I'm going to assume the risk, I'm not going to do anything, and it's my business and I can do what I want. There are risks that come up which pose systemic risk to the entire company and really rise to the level where it should not be the decision of the individual business owner within one line of business within the company to assume risk that is systemic and could potentially affect your whole company. That's when things have to be escalated. That becomes an interesting discussion within the organization. But when risk rise to that level, it really does get to the point, and it's rare, it's not common, but it does rise to the level where it's a question of preserving the risk appetite of the company and preventing something that could potentially have widespread harmful effects to the company, where it needs to be escalated to a senior management conversation. And nobody enjoys those conversations, to be blunt. But when they come up, they have to be dealt with, and you do everything you can to work with the business person involved to try to come to a compromise. But there are times where things do have to be escalated. And when we find ourselves in those circumstances, that's when things get particularly interesting. Lessons learned. So when we talk about incidents, issues that are identified, things that go bump in the night, the process by which we identify those things, detect, respond, and recover from them, that's the immediate topic that we need to address. But the important longer-term question is, what do we do about the lessons that we learned from a given incident? So the problem that I think doesn't always get enough attention within information security is that problems recur. And if you don't implement long-term solutions to address the problems and implement the lessons that you learned from the various incidents that occurred, you're going to repeat those problems at some point in the future. For example, if someone found a vulnerability in your organization that led to a ransomware attack, and you don't fix the reason for that, and you don't implement longer-term solutions, the next hacker that comes along is just going to do the same thing to you over again. Recently, I had to work with a company that needed to address a security vulnerability that was prominent a number of years ago. And they had been victim to it at the time when it came out, and they had to go through the same process again because they had not taken the lessons that they had learned from the incident that occurred and gone about implementing a longer-term solution that would have prevented a recurrence of that incident. So remediating the immediate issue without taking into consideration how you need to change your operational processes, how you need to go about doing things in a different way as you go forward, is a missed opportunity for which you'll have to pay a price later on. So every time there's an incident, your TPRM program should have in place for every incident that occurs, what did I learn from this incident? What do I need to change about how my business operates? And then ensuring, just like you do for issue management, that the lessons learned are applied and implemented within the organization and that operational processes are addressed, is key to the long-term sustainability, not just of your third-party risk management program, but of the operational resilience of your company. Now, having said that, usually incidents have negative connotations and you don't want to have a repeat of them. But the other side of it is that sometimes positive things come out of this, how you responded, the cooperation across different parts of the organization. Those need to be highlighted as well when good things happen. So there are both negative and positive things that can occur, and how we work to use those things to benefit the organization are important, and you shouldn't miss out on the opportunity for the good lessons that are learned. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about regulatory considerations and how that plays into the landscape and the benefit that a lot of this is banking specifics, financial services. So I apologize for that, but I think that the models themselves are very useful regardless of the business you're in. So one of the things I want to start with is what's referred to as the 3 lines of defense model. Now, the 3 lines of defense model involves people who are operationally responsible for doing certain things. That would be the first line of defense. The second line of defense are people who have a responsibility for independent oversight of the first line people. So who's responsible for responding to a security incident? Well, you could say the CISO organization. They would be an example of the first line of defense. Then you might have within your organization an operational risk or an enterprise risk management function. And in their role, they're responsible for reviewing the processes that, in this example, the CISO team would have in place for how they do things on a daily basis. And are those processes effective, or can they be improved? And how do we measure the effectiveness of those first line functions over time? So there's a clear differentiation between those people who are responsible for specific performance of actions as the first line of defense, and then an independent organization within a company that is responsible for the oversight of how those functions are performed and for the opportunity for process improvement. Then the third line of defense is the independent audit function. So organizations have independent auditors who have the right and the responsibility to go in and audit the various functions across the organization, including the first line and the second line. And then they have a responsibility for reporting back to the board of directors and senior management on what they find and whether issues that are identified have appropriate corrective actions, are being addressed timely, or they continue to be problems. So the three lines of defense model offers a way for organizations to ensure the integrity of the operational processes that they have with proper oversight, and then an independent auditing capability. When we move to third-party risk management specifically, and we talk about banking regulations, the main document that people refer to is OCC 2013-29, which is third-party risk management. Now, there have been other regulatory documents that have been published since, but that's the key document for understanding what bank regulators expect of financial services companies that they oversee in terms of managing risks that are associated with third parties. There was an OCC document, and just so you understand the formats, whenever you look up OCC.gov and you're looking for regulations, the year that it was published is how it starts. And then the second number is the, in this case, it was published in 2013, and it was the 29th publication by the OCC that year. So there was another one that was published, an updated FAQ by the OCC in 2020, which is also a useful reference. Right now, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, and the FDIC are jointly working on an updated common standard for third-party risk management. They finished their comment period. They're reviewing the comments that they received. Melissa?
Yeah, I do have one question. It's quick, I think.
Okay.
Regarding the three lines of defense model, which
Yes.
line does third-party risk management fall into?
Third-party risk management has responsibility for the oversight of third parties on an ongoing basis to ensure that risk is mitigated in alignment with the risk appetite of the company. So based on that, I would say that they are a first line function in that they have to perform. Now, I have to caveat this a little bit, because sometimes the implementation of third-party risk management in a company is different. If they're responsible for the performance of risk assessments, the ongoing continuous monitoring of those third parties, and following up on addressing the issues and getting them closed, I would call that a first line function. I have seen in organizations where the person responsible for third-party risk management can be either in information security, they can be in procurement, or they could be a specific person charged with responsibility for oversight of the third-party risk management program. And then the question is, in that context, what is the role of that person? Do they control the resources that have to perform the third-party risk management? Do they control the resources that work with the business and with the third parties to address the issues that were identified? Do they perform the continuous monitoring? Those are first line functions. If the third-party risk management head is only responsible for the oversight of others who perform that function in the organization, you might be able to say that that's more like a second line of defense function. So it depends what's in the remit, the description of the job that's performed by the individual who calls themselves third-party risk management head. But generally for me, it's a first line function.
And then I do have one more quick
Sure.
question. Oh, hold on, I just scrolled back up. Is there a verified checklist to determine what type of risk appetite a company is?
Oh, risk appetite is a whole different conversation. We could have a whole webinar on that. So
I'll let that one go to the wayside then.
Yeah, but what I will say is risk appetite is the responsibility of the board of directors to define for the company. How much risk am I willing to take on to achieve a certain level of reward? So how do I keep a balance? If I'm willing to accept $10 million worth of risk because I'm going to make $100 million, maybe that's an acceptable risk to take. But if it's going to cost me $10 million and I'm only going to the reward is, spend $10 million to fix a problem I have in my company, and the benefit to me is only going to be $5 million. Well, the reward is less than the risk. So that's one way to think about it. But risk appetite is a board responsibility, sometimes referred to as tone at the top. The board sets the risk appetite. They convey that to the senior management, and it's senior management's responsibility to ensure it's executed through the organization. Moving along, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which publishes requirement for government agencies and what they need to comply with, is a fantastic resource here. And NIST 853 revision 5, it has 20 families of topics that it covers in addressing risk. And one of the new additions to Rev 5 was third-party risk management. And there is specific guidance in there, which I think is particularly valuable to anyone who's looking at what I need to do in my third-party risk management program. So NIST 853 R5 is a great resource. Now, another NIST document, which is very helpful when people are looking at cyber risk and what they need to do, is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, sometimes referred to as CSF. It's a good document when you want to exercise across your organization to understand your cybersecurity posture. So those are some of the more relevant and I think helpful documents for people working in third-party risk. So Resilience Operations Center, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because third-party risk management started off with somebody saying, do I know who all my third parties are? And then, do I know what level of compliance, security do my third parties have in place? And then, that was fine 20 years ago when a lot of us started out in this space. But you fast forward today, you need to know on a daily basis what's happening with your third parties. Performing a risk assessment once a year and not combining that with the ability to continuously monitor your third parties leaves you at a real disadvantage. The events that we've seen, whether it's the incidents, the hacks, the ransomwares, the Kaseya's, the SolarWinds, take your pick across the board. More and more supply chain incidents are occurring all the time, and we need to have the flexibility to respond quickly. So you have a third-party risk management program. You probably have a process and a questionnaire that you use. You've probably introduced some tools and platforms and technologies that monitor publicly available information for security or other operational risks or financial health of companies. And those things are all necessary components of it. But if you don't take those things together and determine how you're going to integrate them into your business operational process workflows, then you're not going to be successful. So you can say, I've heard tool X is great to use for being alerted about security vulnerabilities. If you haven't shared that with the people who are responsible for monitoring security vulnerabilities, both your cyber intelligence people, for example, and your security operations center, and figured out how this new tool or platform is going to work in your organization, then you're going to get no value from it. The whole concept of the Resilience Operations Center is that I integrate my new processes and my new platforms and tools into my existing operations function so that it can be leveraged and value is produced and people are notified timely. One of the problems that we run into with all the products and tools that help us out across the board in security is that we need to build in the capability to monitor the results that they produce. If you're not going to monitor the results that they produce, you're better off not having the tools, because that's when software becomes shelfware. So if you're going to look at some technologies to add value for you in third-party risk management, you better make sure you have your operations people at the table. You figure out how they're going to implement it. You're going to figure out what are the skill sets they need to implement it, and do they have the resources to properly manage it? So what are the benefits that derive from the Resilience Operations Center? It helps shift your organizational behavior from response to prevention. The best way to be effective in third-party risk management is to see what's coming at you. And it's not easy to do, but it can be done. So learn how to prevent those things that you can prevent and be ready to respond quickly when you need to. The other aspect is TPRM is an organizational responsibility. So if you're running a TPRM program and you're doing that in a vacuum, you're doing yourself a big disservice. There are many stakeholders across your organization, from the business to legal to procurement to operations, who are critical in helping you be successful. And by adopting a Resilience Operations Center model, you are making it an organization-wide responsibility. It provides you a framework to manage risk beyond your organization's boundaries. So now I have a process by which I can share information with my third parties, and I can digest information for them to take appropriate risk actions. It enables rapid response when you need to respond quickly, and it ensures effective risk mitigation and leveraging of lessons learned, because now it's part and parcel of the fabric of how you operate your business. So Resilience Operations Center for me is the way to tie everything together: the people, all of your resources, your technology, your business processes, into one seamless way to address third-party risk. And one last topic that I want to touch on is the importance of remembering that you're a third party to somebody as well. So you might be running a third-party risk management program, but your company is in all likelihood a third party to your customers. When you think about that, and one of the advantages of remembering this is often, especially for people who are just starting out, you say, where do I start? Well, you know what? Look at your company as a third party. Use the tools and the processes that you have there. Assess yourself and see what you learn for that. And in all likelihood, when you're starting out, that is going to be a very eye-opening exercise, and it's going to help generate positive momentum for what it is that you're trying to do in your organization. Also, By assessing yourself, if you are a third party to any of your customers, you now have the information that you can share with those customers to say, you don't need to come in and do an assessment. I already did it for you. And that can be leveraged over and over and over again. And that can help you in your third party risk management journey. And on that note, that wraps up my presentation for today. If after this, any of you have any questions, you want to reach out to me, here's my contact information, bob@cyberms.net, and my mobile number. Feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to discuss this. This is, believe it or not, what I do for fun. So you can draw your own conclusions from that, but I enjoy this very much, and I'm happy to talk with anybody anytime about any of this. So I'd like to turn it over to Scott, who's going to continue the presentation.
Thanks very much, Bob. And if you could stop sharing your screen so I could share mine.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, promise. No judgments based on what you like to do in your hobbies related to third-party risk management. Might recommend baseball or something more interesting. Anyway,
I'll take it under advisement.
Very good. Let's kind of take this back, strip this back to the screws for a second. What we have discovered throughout this four-part journey with Bob, and especially today as he really dissected important elements to report on from a performance and a risk perspective and understanding incidents and issue management and more, is that this is a progressive journey that just doesn't happen overnight and it doesn't begin immediately. It involves taking, bite-sized chunks, small steps to grow and progress a program over time. And as we have helped companies move along this representative journey here, from maybe a less mature operational type approach to a much more mature and programmatic approach, we've seen some commonalities kind of surface throughout that process. First is just getting better control of who your vendors are, and that starts with an inventorying process, using one single system of record to be your vendor information, integrating it with integrating systems together with APIs, doing spreadsheet uploads, doing some sort of intake, whatever, to get everything together. You don't know what you have until you know what you have. And then the second step is applying some intelligence to ditch manual methods, looking at assessments much more holistically based on the domain and the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and then overlaying some continuous monitoring data to fill gaps in between those regular assessments. It starts with a profiling and tiering exercise to understand where your third parties belong in your hierarchy, your level of criticality, based on the data they interact with, based on regulatory requirements, whatever. And then you've got your vendors centralized to one location. You've got some profiling and tiering to understand who your priority vendors are. You're issuing your assessments. You're managing through those those in-between assessment pieces of monitoring to get some intelligence to kind of fill gaps. That gives you a pool of intelligence to help you make better decisions on an ongoing basis and move to what we consider to be a much more continuous, intelligent, and automated model. And throughout that process, you can prescribe KPIs and KRIs to measure against. You can be better positioned to respond more efficiently, to mitigate risks, instead of always kind of on the back end of responses, for example. That's our view of kind of how you progress through some sort of a mature model to get from maybe what you're looking at today from a from a very manual siloed process to something that's much more unified. We do this across the third-party lifecycle as well. Our view of risk is that it doesn't start and stop with onboarding a new vendor or assessing a vendor on a contract renewal basis, maybe a yearly basis, but you have to look at risk throughout every stage where that vendor presents themselves to you in their life cycle, whether it's selection, onboarding, scoring inherent risks, doing your regular assessments and monitoring for validation of results in between those assessments, but measuring SLAs and performance, which is, sometimes, antithetical to a security operations person's, remit. And then looking at risk also from an offboarding and a termination perspective. So you've got, that bookend of risk monitoring capability, throughout that life cycle. We can help you do that. We can help you deliver a much more holistic and mature third-party risk management program, whether it's leveraging a network of already completed risk assessments that you can check in and check out like a library, to having us do the collection, analysis, and remediation work on your behalf, to you doing it yourself, supported by our team, along with threading in the continuous monitoring insights, for security, operations, performance, procurement, privacy, and all these different, related domains. At the end of the day, our objective is threefold. Number one, to help you be smarter, make smarter risk-based decisions based on as much data as possible. Not necessarily as much data as possible, but the data that's relevant to making good decisions. To unify your approach so that you're bringing, previously siloed teams and departments together, so you're looking at risk holistically together, and then to be very prescriptive about what to do with it all. It's one thing to collect information, analyze it, get a report, then what? Our best practices guidance can help you determine what you need to do to get down to an acceptable level of risk and to manage that risk appetite, internally. That's what I wanted to share with you today, Melissa. I'll pitch it back to you so we can continue with our conversation on some Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. Now would be, like you said, a really good time to drop a question in the Q&A box. And then while I do that, I'm just going to launch one last poll. We're curious, right, to know if you're looking to establish or augment a third-party risk program within a year. Just be honest, because we do follow up with you. This is not just a formality. It will be myself, Amanda, Landon, or Noel, if you haven't heard our names before. And our first question, let's check it out. For companies in the process of rolling out third-party risk management in phases or building on it continuously, some data may not be available, relevant, or understood at early stages. Any tips for incrementally maturing metrics or reporting in parallel with the program, like what to focus on and how to tell the story, et cetera?
Again, a longer conversation, but a short answer is you start with what you have. So I had mentioned a few items during my presentation. You measure trends. You ask yourself, so what? What does this tell me? Is there any value in what I'm collecting? And at the beginning, you can say, well, I have no data. I don't know what my inventory is. I don't know how many issues I have, etc. So you know what you do? You track it and you put 0 in there, because when you put 0 in there, it's going to elicit a reaction from management. How come we don't know who our vendors are? What do you need to get this information? That's what you're here for. Why don't we know what our issues are? Why haven't they been tracked over time? And these roadblocks that you run into, you can leverage your metrics and your reporting, even if it's zeros, to create the management movement you need to support you to get your program off the ground. So you start with what you have, you figure out what else is meaningful to describe the trends of what you're doing, and you continue to build on it. But if you don't have anything at the beginning, that's a status update.
Perfect. And then I do have another one. Well, I have a few of them, but let's see. Last question, I promise, he says, with all the methodologies and standards out there, like NIST, ISO, et cetera, which standard are you more supportive for convenience and sheer volume of adoption in the industry?
Well, standards provide you guideposts. Different industries tend to focus on different standards, like the NIST standards. Those are applicable to U.S. government entities. They're developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. ISO is a different mechanism that some industries favor. For standardization, you go through a process, you get your ISO certification. They're good as far as they go. The important thing to remember is that the purpose of your third-party risk management program is to identify who your third parties are, who their fourth and fifth parties are, and that they have adequate security in place. So it's not for me so much a question of which standard I favor. It's a question about how I go about understanding the risk appetite of my company and addressing that risk. I can't give you more than that in the limited time we have.
Perfect. Well, thank you for answering those questions. I know we had a few outstanding ones, but Bob gave his contact info, so take him up on it, right? He'll
I'm
love that.
happy to
Like you
chat.
said. That's his hobby after all. So that is all the time we have for today, everybody. But I hope you enjoyed the series. If you stuck through all 4 parts, good on you. And I will see you at the next one. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.